Good morning, everybody. I'm Ken Phelan. I'm Chief Technology Officer for Gotham Technology Group. Thank you for joining this in our series of conversations about cyber threats and what we're seeing out there. This month, we're going to focus on email because email is essentially the bane of everyone's existence. I was talking to some of my friends at Proofpoint who help us with a lot of these problems, and I said, who can we talk to? And they suggested we speak to John. John Checco is on with us today. He is the resident CISO for Proofpoint and has a broad understanding of these problems. John, resident CISO sounds like a pretty good job. Like, how does one get a job like resident CISO? Like, what brought you to this?
You have to fail a lot. So the more you fail, the more experience you get. And with the more experience, then you can tell people, you can tell your stories about how you failed, and hopefully they don't make the same mistakes. No, seriously, I was actually I was CISO for Bloomberg's personal wealth product, and then built their BISO program, and then I moved over to Bank of America to build their BISO program, which is quite large. And again, all that experience and got me into this role here as an advisory CISO for Proofpoint. I love the role because I get to talk about things that interest me, like zero trust and social engineering and all these interesting things with my peers, and hopefully it can help them.
Yeah, it's probably also exciting to not have the problems of being an actual CISO and have like audit, findings and things you have to worry about. I think
I've been through that. I've
in
been
the
there,
middle of
done
the night
that.
calls. Yeah, right, exactly. So there's some benefits there too. So, and any of you CISOs out there that are imagining how to move on into the resident CISO role, talk to John afterwards about how to make this wonderful transition to the other side of the fence. Terrific. So I guess I think this whole email thing. Has lots of different elements, but one of them is this motion towards, the weakest link is always the people. People are the problem, and I think that's a flag we wave in cyber sometimes because we want to just basically kind of use this to get our jail free card, but people are still our problem. How do we solve this sort of people problem? And do you think there's on a broad scale? How do you even start to approach this issue of it's just the people?
Yeah, it's interesting because I just want to take a step back and just talk about the security industry in general, and think about the security tools industry. Security tools against technology or for technology protection have been around since the 1980s. I mean, we're really good at protecting our technology and protecting our firewalls, and even with this Log4j technical exploit, just by changing a few firewall rules, we can actually mitigate a lot of what's happening with Log4j. So we're really good at what we do with technology security. So threat actors have moved to what I call the path of least resistance, which is people. So if your technology measures and technology controls are so good, well, why not just ask the user to bypass them for you? And that's where people-centric security come in. And I really think about this because it's people haven't changed. They technology has progressed and our technology security tools have progressed, but people haven't changed. And I believe everyone probably has a security awareness training. And if you use security awareness training, you probably are going through that video. It tells you not to open up rogue emails or unsolicited emails, and not to open up PDFs or other attachments. But think about your recruiting team. Your recruiting team's job is to do exactly that. Think about your sales teams that have to respond to RFPs. Their job is to actually go to Dropbox and some of these consumer-based places and open up files that they don't know what's in there. So the security awareness training needs to be adjusted to the type of roles that you have to deal with, right? So the typical security awareness training is not, and this goes back to the point that our security defenses for people are not as mature as they should be.
Yeah, security awareness training has come some distance. I think if you looked at it a few years ago, it was really just a checkbox. Like, people were forced to sit and listen to some video for some period of time. And it's almost like the safety checkbox or whatever, like wear your hard hat. But I think we've tried to get somewhat better. I mean, I guess I'll put it on you, but I have some thoughts. So, like, what makes a good security awareness program versus an insufficient security awareness program in your mind?
A good security awareness program is one that's different for each division or role that you have to mitigate, right? So I think understanding what the person's role is and what their workflow is day to day is really important. That requires a business analyst to understand, to go through and say, hey, what's happening in this division or what's happening in this team that we have to worry about. And then from the business analyst perspective, you got to do threat modeling. Threat modeling says what are the typical exploits, and we do threat modeling for security and for technology and software all the time. But we don't do threat modeling for people. And if we start doing the threat modeling for people, we'll find out where their weakest points are and start focusing on those areas. We don't need to have everyone take 15 modules of security awareness training, but maybe the top 3 that affect them the most would be the best way of using their time.
Yeah, and it's like a numbers game, right? Like I'm going to get a certain amount of attacks and a certain number of people, but I mean, and that's kind of the frustrating part. Like if I move the needle, all they need to do is get one email through. I mean, so if they're going to email 1,000 people, someone's going to click. And to your point, that's what they do all day, right? They click that stuff. I mean, I don't want to say it's a lost cause, but it seems like a challenging problem to reach, to count on people to reach a significant number of a safety feature there.
Yeah, you have to change the culture. And another example I'll give is phishing tests. In the 2 previous financial firms I worked at, they had some great phishing companies that would do phishing tests and report scores and stuff like that. And in fact, what we found is that people knew how to game the system. They knew how to look at an email to see if it was the phishing test or a real email. And of course, they put the phishing and then through the URL rewrites, right? So they would always click on the phishing test and really get good scores on the phishing test, but that didn't really help our throughput on malware. And so what we found was that people were gearing themselves towards the tests. What we did at one company was we actually changed the motivation. And how did we do that? Well, we gave people points towards the company store for every email that they put down as a phishing email, and regardless if it was a real or if it was a test. And if they tried to game the system by sending the corporate emails to the phishing team, they'd get points taken away. So you bank these points, you could buy stuff at the company store, but what that did, it changed people's perspective on looking at the email more closely, because they were getting points for real phishing emails as well as the tested emails. And that changed the way they look at their email. Rather than looking for the test, they were looking for phishing indicators. So that's a change in the mindset. And again, that's just one small example of changing the culture. So another way we change the culture is to make things personal. We had a initiative at one of the banks I worked at where we took the executives and we showed them how to secure their home networks. And this was years ago, way before COVID. Thank God we did that, because now they're probably a better level of security than they would have been. But we made it personal. And then we slowly pivoted that personal set of security controls to what they need to do with corporate controls and corporate data. So we made it personal first, made it relevant to them, and then started introducing some of the corporate concepts. Again, changing the culture, changing the mindset. I think that's really important.
Yeah, I like what you're saying here. I mean, first of all, I want to acknowledge, I think we've gotten a lot better. Like we used to run phishing tests, and not very super, great ones, but like we even like, click this link, get a free iPad. And like we would essentially score over 100% only because they would forward it to their friends outside the company. I mean, we would, we would just get these huge responses. And so that, that's what we're talking about like 10 years ago. People have gotten better, but essentially, like you said, there's still things. But I love your cultural point, because I think that's something, like that I see people encouraging, which is by not just by not clicking, but by reporting, you're helping your friends, right? Like safety is a team sport. Yep. And how do you build that culture of, reporting, saying something, helping the person next to you? I think that's a pretty critical thing. I think it's hard to get people, particularly if you have a company full of introverted engineers, to necessarily be that, to speak out like that. So I think that's a good idea.
Another point there is office space, right? We all used to work in offices, and if we got a phone call that didn't sound right or an email that didn't look right, I could just turn over, hey, Joe, did you get this too, or does this seem right? Right? We had that peer connection where we could just look over each other's shoulders, have that second set of eyes, just in case it was, questionable. With everyone working from home or working in hybrid workspaces, we don't have that interaction anymore. We don't have that informal second set of eyes, that ancillary data to help us make decisions. So we have to be better at helping people make better decisions about what they're looking at. So it's a tough nut to crack.
No, and they've gotten a lot better. I mean, the threat actors have gotten much better and much more targeted, I think, too. And it's not just about the iPad. I think that they're targeting specific employees, they're targeting specific groups, they're using trusted vendors that you already might use. And that's, I mean, one of the things that that we use and some of the partners we use is, they basically craft emails for your business or even for a group of people in your business, specifically using, we did one, because we're a reseller, we did one recently from one of our distributors, like from Ingram to our team, or a fake email from Ingram. So, I mean, but to me, that's fair play because that's what the threat actors are doing.
Yep.
Some of the people that use like, well, this is too good. I'm like, I don't think it's any better than threat actors are going to do. I mean, how do you get that that focus? I mean, and see that change.
So it's funny. So I misspoke before when I said we suck at people engineering. We're actually really good at protecting people because most of our secure email gateways stop a lot of the phishing attempts, right? And start a lot of the automated, what I call spray and pray. So the fully automated malware and phishing attacks are no longer working. So we've done a great job of forcing the threat actors to become more personal themselves, to expend resources on emails that have no links and no attachments that tell you to call a number because of some order that got placed, right? And you call the number, and then they have call centers. We've actually changed the way threat actors work. We're forcing them to spend more money on resources to get access to our data. So what happens? Well, they run like a business. So they need to cut costs. So what are they doing? Well, they're hiring call centers. They're outsourcing their payloads, their ransomware. They're doing a lot of commoditization and modularization within their business to make them more efficient at what they do. But that is also creating a slower uptake, right? That's why they're doing more targeted attacks because they need to do reconnaissance and go specifically at users because they only have so many people in the call centers that can answer those calls, just like our own customer support. So it's interesting to see the threat actors working as a business and starting to mature as a business.
Yeah, I find that motion to that two-tier attack of an email and a phone call to be scary as F. I mean, that whole situation, because they'll also place inbound calls to you if you're truly a whale, right? So you're seeing an email, then you're getting a phone call from someone, and they're acting like a normal. It's just that's a very high level of attack, but they're motioning to that pretty quickly, and it's just that. And like you say, the economics of it are scary, but obviously they've got a return on investment.
Yeah, and I think there's also a generational thing where I grew up. I'm a baby boomer, and I grew up very untrustworthy of anything that comes in that's not expected. Where I think the younger generations are so much on social media and get so many unsolicited emails and so many unsolicited phone calls. They're less aware. So one of the things I've done with my own family is if we get a phishing a spam call for something like an Amazon order that really didn't exist. We have a game where we try and keep that spammer on the line as long as possible and try and reverse the tables and try and get information about them, like where are you calling from? Your connection's a little, spotty. Can I call you back? Right? Can I get your phone number? So I think that was important for the younger generation or our kids to learn how to spot these things and the types of phrases that they would use on these call centers to try and get them more aware that not everything is going to be social media acceptable.
Yeah, no, it's like I said. I think the fact that you're getting both things kind of does throw people off because it seems like a confirmation. You're seeing an email and then you have a phone call, and like unless you really stop and call back and the rest of those things, I think that just it's something that wins quite often. That they're able to kind of get in that way. And when I talk to our red team actors, that's they're saying that's got a high prevalence of success if they team up the emails with phone calls. They're quite often getting in. And again, like there's lots of things you can do. People don't realize you can fake caller ID. You can fake, you can come through with a lot of different ways. And if you put a person who's got a good line of BS, which many of us do, on the phone, like it just sounds right. Like it's a good deep voice, and it sounds like a good, an American voice. It's just of course, the guy must be from a bank. Let's get him an ACH right away. So. So I guess, we're talking down this issue of how we protect. We're seeing more stuff. I mean, what? Just before we move off this people thing, and you're talking about getting the right training, getting the right phishing. I mean, it's a whole program. Are there any elements we're missing to the what else? What can we do to get our people in the right mode? And again, and what does success even look like? Like, how do I judge? How would I go to my board and say our people are as good as they could possibly be because of X?
I think there's really no metric, and that's about with any security metric, right? That deals with behaviors. There's really nothing quantitative, but qualitatively, again, it's a matter of being able to change that culture, right? It's got to start from the top down, right? Your security first paradigm needs to be from the executives to your development teams, right? They got to start designing technology, designing security into their technologies from the beginning, from your sales teams. Putting security first. Again, if you can talk a good game, but if you're not doing it at the top levels and making it visible at the top levels, you're going to have a very low acceptance rate. And so reporting up, if it's done right, reporting up shouldn't be a surprise, right? Reporting up should be, yeah, we do that too, right? So I think there's a matter of, again, bringing that culture, and how do you make sure that culture sticks? Well, it starts from the top.
Yeah, to me, I say embrace the conflict. Reward your red team for how many people they catch, your phishing team, and reward your population for how many things they that they stop and look at those metrics there. But let's keep pressing the envelope, because that's what the threat actors are doing. They're going to keep moving forward.
Absolutely.
Right. Yeah. Fantastic. So, I mean, I guess a lot of this boils down to, right, this, if we look at a standard attack chain today, the attack chain that keeps everybody up at night is this business of a link comes in through an email, you press on the link and you get ransomware. And ransomware is top of everybody's list in terms of, what they need to do for that. When I look at that attack chain, what's the best place to stop it, and how do I think about that?
Sure. So there's four steps in really a typical phishing attack. One, there's the lure, right? The lure is basically getting your attention. Then there's the delivery, right? So the delivery is the actual link or the document that they're using to get access to your system. Then there's the payload. The payload is the ransomware or the other malware that's actually going to execute the data exfiltration or data encryption. And then there's the actual execution, the actual data exfiltration itself. So let's talk about this in terms of the Nist cybersecurity framework. Well, the lures are going to be basically in the identify and protect realm, right? If you understand the lures, and that goes through security awareness training from the people side. If you know the lures, you can avoid them. But if you fall for a lure, then you get into the delivery mechanisms. Now, delivery mechanisms and payloads are both malware, but they serve two different purposes. And a lot of security teams look at malware as malware and saying, we need to stop this malware. We need to stop ransomware. Well, if you break it into stage 1 and stage 2, right, delivery and payload, deliveries fall into the identify, detect, and protect columns of NIST CSF. And the payload falls into the protect, respond, and recover side of things, right? When the payload is in, the delivery has done its job. So if the payload's in, you already have someone working laterally through your network or looking at your data for exfiltration. So that's why you have to change your defenses to look at, to defend against delivery and defend against payloads totally differently. And then, of course, the data exfiltration itself is your typical DLP programs to make sure that data is authorized. And when it's authorized, it's going to the right places. That requires an identity and access management program, role-based access control, which nobody has achieved properly, and basically behavioral analysis, right? Do these files normally go to these places? The other thing I'm a big fan of, and this has nothing to do with Proofpoint, but another big thing I'm a big fan of is asymmetric encryption. If you're going to share data with your clients or with your suppliers, use asymmetric encryption. So if the data does get out, the only people who can read it are the people who are responsible for it. So again, it all comes down to authorized data. If you think about the whole Snowden effect, Snowden had authorized access to all the things that he exfiltrated from the NSA. So making sure you limit what your people have authorization to is important.
Yeah. Well, and again, to your point, that's a very difficult thing to do, and people go through it, and try to manage it, try to do that stuff. And I think, we see motions of people trying to get better at that. We also see a lot of conversations about how, sort of AI machine learning type conversations start to maybe fix that of like, what is normal behavior for this user? Is it normal behavior for this user to download, every document they have access to? But I guess my experience in real life is that that's just the machine learning concept sounds cool, but it's really difficult to implement. Like fundamentally, the signal to noise ratio is hard. You just don't have enough, in my understanding of it. You do a good machine learning job, you basically need a lot of data, and you
Yep.
need to have it already categorized into what good and bad looks like.
Yep.
That's just not what we have when we're talking about file access and email and that kind of stuff. So I mean, do you think that's a solution for this in the end?
So Ken, you hit
in the
a
end?
good, you hit a big passion of mine. Any vendor you get in that's going to do analysis of your network or net flow or any, assume the network is dirty. A lot of these tools don't assume the network's dirty. They're assuming that you're going to do a baseline on, is like I said, a good signal to noise ratio, right? And that's usually not the case. If you're getting a security tool in to look at your net flow, it's usually because something's already going wrong. So assume the networks are dirty, assume your role-based access controls are dirty, and work from there. And again, then you can start looking at the machine learning results and say, how do I tweak this, right? AI is really interesting. So ML and AI. So ML is the data gathering and the data analysis. AI is the decision making portion of that. So we have to separate the two. You can use generic machine learning algorithms, but if you're going to do AI algorithms should be specific to the type of decision you want, right? You shouldn't have a generic AI algorithm and say, oh, we're going to apply it here, apply it there. So dealing with AI and ML is a tricky thing. But again, it comes down to when you're building the data or feeding the data into the system, understand your data. And if you don't understand your data, yeah, you're going to get the wrong results.
Yeah, like I said, I just don't think we have enough. Like I said, we don't have enough data, and it's not put into the right buckets for us, for the machines to learn. But at the same time, as like, as a computer guy who likes computers and hates people, like I wish we had a solution. It's like, why are we teaching users that, like, oh, that URL looks sketchy? Like, can't we teach the computers like what a sketchy URL looks like? Those kinds of things seem frustrating to me. But at the same time, it's difficult to write the rule. And you always have that conversation with somebody. I'll be sitting, whatever. We're a small company, but like theoretically, I'm a partner. I'm on the board. So, but like board conversations could be, I don't understand why I'm getting this spam, and I'm like, I don't know. Tell me what rule you want to put in place. You want to put a rule in that every single email that has Viagra doesn't come through. I'll write one, but maybe that's not the right rule. So you tell me the rule, and I'll be glad to go implement it for you. But it is frustrating that we can't get better, on a compute level, and that we're trying to teach people these rules that theoretically we should be able to teach, our software.
Yeah, and that goes down to something called domain twisting, right? We see a lot of domain twisting. For you who don't know what that term is, it's a great term to use in a bar. It's it basically means that
Does that impress all the women, John? If you use domain twist, it's like
or all the
a
techies,
card,
right? You impress all the techies.
all the techies, yeah. Yeah.
So basically, domain twisting is basically taking a normal domain like Microsoft.com and registering domains that where the O's are zeros, or it's Microsoft-support.com, right? Anything that will get a user to look at that domain and think it's normal. On the other hand, automation, and it's actually easier to teach people what domain twisting is than it is to teach a machine what domain twisting is. There's some simple rules for domain twisting, right? Is a letter replaced with a number on the domain, or they're using IDN, international characters. But there's a lot of domain twisting that a machine would look at and say, that looks normal to me, right? There's nothing wrong with that domain. So I don't think we're there yet. I think we need to have better learning algorithms, or I'm a big fan of whitelisting. Whitelist first and start expanding from there. With larger businesses, that's difficult, but blacklisting is always it has a smaller return on investment the longer you go with blacklisting. So
Yeah. I don't know. I think whitelisting, they're both hard. I think everyone does a lot of stuff, but I do like. I know you guys do a little bit of this over Proofpoint, but like the web isolation. I mean, like I love. To me, that's like one of those big dumb technology. Like every time it's uncategorized, just feel free to open it up in an isolated session, and it won't do damage that way. And certainly you still have operational challenges, but I think in the long run, that's a way to go. I mean, what do you think about that?
I'm a big fan of web isolation. Actually, when I was at the bank prior to Proofpoint, we actually deployed web isolation in two different ways. So we had web isolation outbound. So for anything that wasn't a whitelisted sub domain or subdomain, automatically went to the browser isolation. But then for our admins and people who had elevated privileges who were doing patching and work on systems through a terminal, SSH terminal, we would actually open up SSH terminal in a browser isolated interface. So that way they couldn't exfiltrate data like inside a threat. They couldn't exfiltrate data from the server to their local machine. They couldn't upload configuration files from the local machine to the server. So we allowed them to do their work on the server, but kind of, again, kept them away from the corporate network. This also helps if there was someone who was sitting in the network and was looking to laterally move across the network. This type of web isolation prevented that. So internally facing web isolation is great for admins, and externally facing isolation is great for the common user. And this goes down to, well, we'll get to zero trust maybe a little later, but this goes down to a type of zero trust by isolating users to exactly their role and preventing lateral movement.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, look, I don't want to oversell in the sense that like web isolation is a bit of a hassle. Like you are going to be whitelisting and managing it and doing stuff. It's
Yes.
It's I don't say it's the most operationally challenging thing you're going to do, but it's got some concerns there because you're going to find that there's a lot of uncategorized websites that require to be not in the web isolation, that kind of stuff. But fundamentally, I think the benefits of it, because we're talking about this two-phase attack of like, is this really an email problem or is it a browser problem? If somebody emails you a link and you click on it,
Yep.
is it really an email problem? Like it's, how's the email supposed to stop that? You really should be dealing with that probably in the browser, right?
Yeah, and I know from Proofpoint's perspective, we have a web isolation product. And again, I'm not a product person, but the one thing I like about this is that it opens up in an isolated browser or isolated instance in your browser. And if you find that it's a valid URL, you can click exit the isolation and go straight to your normal browser, which is pretty cool because not only are you now have control over what can be in isolation or not, but it gets logged. So if something were to happen, they can come back and say, "Hey, John, you clicked on this this Dropbox site here. Why did you do that?" Right? And so there's some traceability or auditability with that particular feature. So I thought that was pretty cool.
Yeah, I think combined, I've always been skeptical of sort of those technologies. They're like, are you sure technologies? Because, most of us have been categorized like whatever. Of course, I'm sure. Yeah. But I think in conjunction with some of the cultural changes we're seeing and training people into, I think are you sure checks, might be a little more effective. I haven't seen numbers on it, but because again, we're seeing more of that kind of like, are you sure you want to do this? Are you sure you want to open this
Yeah,
this
I think
document?
it's a matter of phrasing. So yeah, we're so in tune to saying, are you sure that we're not really saying what are you sure of. So I think changing the phrasing, saying, hey, we'll open this document, but it's going to be logged and because it looks suspicious, or yes, you can open this, but we're going to isolate your machine temporarily while this document's open. Giving people the reason why you're doing it and what the consequences are, I think gives them a better idea of saying, oh, maybe let me read this first in isolation, and then I'll decide whether to open it up in regular. So, again, making people think first is important. And this comes from, again, if it's normal behavior. Again, at Bloomberg, this was normal behavior that everyone opened everything up in isolation first before and then they could jump to a regular browser when they need to. It became commonplace, and people never thought about it. It wasn't frictionless, but it wasn't a showstopper.
Yeah, I also like content filters. I like things that basically all the work, all the all your office stuff gets all the it gets scraped and redone. Maybe most of it's PDF. Like to me, again, that's one of those big fat dumb technology things where it's like I don't need to make decisions about this stuff or look for every piece of malware. I'm just going to assume everything's somewhat potentially bad, and clean everything. I mean, I think things like that are valuable too.
Yeah, CDR, content disarm and reconstruction. I'm a big fan of CDR. Um, there's a lot of great vendors out there in the CDR space. They all have um, different ways of performing it and different interfaces. But I think again, it's one of those things that if it's the norm, it's not going to be a big item. Of course, we know from being in the field so long how many Excel spreadsheets have macros in them internally that kind of do, or even when we get a SIG spreadsheet for a security questionnaire that has macros that give you your risk rating. Well, if it came from an outside source, do I really want those macros? Sometimes I have to use those macros. So it's a matter of good due diligence.
Yeah, and again, the users can request the actual file, but then they've gone through a process of thinking about it, requesting the file, trusting the file, all that kind of stuff. So, like I said, I think those broader things kind of help us, again, play this numbers game of what, inching up. We're never going to be 100% secure, but inching up past wherever we are for another, give us another 5 points of safety. So I'll take an extra 5 points all day.
Well, and most of us on the call, I believe, are senior execs and CISOs, and we have this idea of risk tolerance. When I was at a bank, we had a great security team, but they thought everything had to be 100% secure. They didn't have that concept of, hey, the business is allowing some risk tolerance in these areas, and so we can, what's satisfactory. And I think that was kind of created friction between the business units and the security team. Once the security team understood that there was a risk tolerance feature, that they could accept certain risks or defer certain risks, and went to the business with that, the business had a better relationship with the security team because they were working together towards a corporate goal or a corporate defined tolerance.
Yeah, I think it's tough, but just because as we've gone on, particularly in the ransomware situation, we're looking at more and more extreme outcomes. Yeah. Like this, having this conversation with customers about like these extreme but plausible scenarios, and unfortunately, and it's not just a matter of losing one machine or whatever. These guys are getting in, like you said, they're making lateral movement, they're getting control over a large part of the network, then they're making their move. Sometimes even owning backups before they make their move. So, as the outcome becomes more and more extreme from a risk perspective, you get concerned about smaller and smaller percentages, right? So I think the math on that just makes you look at these things and it's worth being somewhat nervous over for sure. So I think that part of that inconvenience level, people's perception of what inconvenience is acceptable, I think has also moved. Right? They're like, okay, it's okay to inconvenience the users a bit at this point because it's the outcomes are too severe.
Yeah, and actually, I've seen some companies have a type of phishing test where if you fail the phishing test, it actually bricks your computer for an hour, and you have to call support, and support says, "Oh yeah, because you failed the test." That is not a good way of approaching the problem, I think.
Yeah.
So.
No. Listen, yeah, I feel like again, speaking for mostly, I feel like at this point, like public shame is all you need. Like, I think if your boss finds out that you're clicking on things, that's enough. Like nobody wants to be that person or that department or whatever else. So, I don't think you need anything past just good old fashioned shame. It's working just fine.
No, go ahead.
No, good.
I was going to say the other area I found that was interesting is sometimes the user's not aware, but a lot of these emails have attacks, serverless attacks, right? PowerShell scripts, things that would not be detected by some of the software controls and security controls. And one of the things was non-traditional scripting languages, right? I see a lot in the scripting languages of Go and Rust and Node.js. Node.js was an interesting one because Node.js is normally a server type technology, but the attack that we saw was at a trading firm, and we actually looked into this small trading firm, and they were actually building desktop applications using desktop versions of Node.js. So this particular attack was written in Node.js, specific to this one customer, and I thought that was real interesting because that kind of shows how much reconnaissance these threat actors are doing and trying to get into these companies. Really, really targeted.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. So I guess since you are a proof point, that opens kind of the door for this conversation. Like I think, this is a mature technology, or at least email blocking and email stuff, and what the space we're in, and we're seeing this, whatever, and also the people writing these exploits, the threat actors, a lot of them probably have a lot of the same tools in their lab that we have protecting us, and that's a good example of like how are they pushing it forward? Like what's on the cutting edge right now from a bad actor's perspective? In terms of that kind of stuff, is it?
Yeah,
part of it.
And that's exactly it. So it's things that would bypass existing security rules. Ironically, right, most of the threat actors have all the AV engines on their development systems because they're writing things to get around their AV systems. Same thing with the secure email gateways. They're writing things that will get around the existing secure email gateway rules. Again, the non-traditional scripting languages. They actually defer detection because they don't put in IP addresses. They go to the blockchain and pull the IP addresses of their command and control centers off the blockchain. They're mimicking the security companies themselves. Proofpoint itself has been mimicked in some phishing emails, and that's I guess a badge of honor when you reach that level where they start mimicking your company. But we're seeing this, and it's being done actively, and it's being done more and more. So they're doing the work. It's a business. They're trying to find the best way of being operationally successful.
Yeah, no, I think they're pushing forward. Obviously, you guys as an industry, the whole industry is trying to push forward. I guess one of the things that concerns me. I know a lot of customers are moving to Office 365, looking at different solutions, looking at all different things there. And obviously, you kind of work for Proofpoint, but you've been an actor for a long time. Like, what does a customer do if I'm out there making changes to my cybersecurity system, thinking about my email platform as a whole, thinking about making product selections and looking at, well, Microsoft does this natively, but these guys do this, and these guys, like, how do I approach the industry and think about who's really being effective right now?
Yeah, I take two tacks. Number one, as a CISO, I would say, hey, I'm not going to do a rip and replace. So before I even think about rip and replacing, especially some of the bigger platforms, see if I can get a POC with a passive, a passive POC, which means that if I am using E5 for my email protection, can I put Proofpoint on top of it passively and see if Proofpoint caught anything more? Right, and what's the threshold? Well, the threshold we found was if they catch 7% more bad emails than E5, it's worth it, right? But if it's not, that means you're configured properly. The other thing I'd like to talk about is, again, we don't want to do a rip and replace, so let's augment your existing security. Good example is when I was at the bank, I was involved in an insider threat investigation. And with the insider threat investigation, we saw a Bloomberg kiosk being used to exfiltrate data. Well, the kiosks don't have a login, so we had no traceability into it other than the bandwidth spike saying that data was being exfiltrated. We went through the videotapes. It was actually in a secured area of the bank, and went through the videotapes. We found 3 people who used the kiosk within that time frame. We went to each person and interviewed them, and we found the person themselves. They were let go, or actually they got up and quit right away. And this wasn't a typical insider threat. This person was an MIT graduate, had worked for the bank for 17 years, had great performance reviews, had great bonuses. So what caused this person to exfiltrate data? And again, we had no idea where it was going, so we decided to use our archive tool to look back at their communications. And we saw that there was a lot of communications between them and a competitor. And again, the competitor was just trying to poach them and slowly getting them to think about their contacts and some of the other data that they need to exfiltrate. We went one step further. We said, well, this competitor sent out this email with these subjects, and we said, well, how many other emails were sent out? So again, we used our archive tool to pull all the emails from this competitor with this particular subject line, and we found that there were 7 other employees that were trying to be poached. Now, it made me glad that only 1 out of 8 were actually fell for it. But we found that the problem was not an insider threat, but was more systemic. And we were able to take that archive data, package it, give it to legal, and allow legal to take their proper remedies against this competitor. That's really important, right? That's more than just insider threat tool, right? That's kind of using your tools in conjunction with each other. And I think if we start thinking that way, we'll find that we can start augmenting our existing security tools with a lot of new tools in a different way. And that's just one example. I have 6 use cases, but that's the one I love the best because it shows that it found a simple problem and found the systemic root cause, and we were able to stop that root cause.
Yeah, no, it's important that and you were talking about this before, like your defend, protect, your Nist structure. Like when you look at the things you're buying, it's important to decide like are they good on every level? Like do they help defend? Can I prove that they're defending? Can I help? But like to your point too, like is the tool useful in an investigation? And how useful does it have the right data? Can I get to the data? Like what? How does that structure work from an investigation standpoint? So I think the awareness part's important, the defense part is important. All those things are important, but I think as you look at each of those elements, tools bring different strengths to different areas. And I always say, like, if your investigators are never looking at this tool, like that should be a red sign. Like if you're like, because they've got their perspective, right, their analyst perspective on how I'm gonna shag this fly ball down.
Yeah.
If they're not going to your tool set, then maybe you should think of a different tool set.
You brought up something interesting about talking about figuring out where your weaknesses are as far as your security portfolio. And I'm a big fan of the cyber defense matrix. The cyber defense matrix takes the Nist CSF and as columns and puts in for rows the different types of assets you have. And it's good to map where you think your protections are, but I think from a budgeting perspective, start mapping your security vendors and the tools that you use in those areas, how much you spend on not so much licensing, but licensing, resources, and maintenance, right? Configuration and or mitigation, and start using that matrix to find out. Well, we're not spending. Say, you might find out that you're not spending enough in respond and recovery for workloads, right? That's actually usually an area where people don't spend any money because people back up data and they do response recovery for data, but they forget about the workloads and the servers that run them. So using the cyber defense matrix against your existing security tools and also how much you're costing on those tools will kind of give you a clear idea of where are you overspending in an area, are you underspending in an area, and that's kind of when you start looking at your 2022 or your 3 to 5 year outlook. You can say, well, we're going zero trust, but before we go zero trust, we need to start building out the response and recovery for data, response and recovery for workloads, maybe protect and detect for servers, and kind of figure out what the game plan is. So that way you have a nice, even balanced security portfolio.
Well, I think as an industry, I don't say we do a disservice, but we tend to get behind certain sort of buzzwords or whether it's a threat vector or a cool new thing, and two of them are ransomware and zero trust, to name two, which is that. So I'm buying an endpoint protection based on the fact that they tell me they stop ransomware. I'm buying email protection based on telling me they tell me it stops ransomware. I'm like all up and down the line we're saying this, and it's the same thing about, to some extent, on a different side about I want to achieve zero trust. So what does that mean? I'm buying, web everything, right? From the IAM guys are talking about zero trust, the guys who do sort of microsegmentation are talking about zero trust. So I think we confuse the marketplace, at least from an engineering perspective. And and you brought this up before, but I don't know. I mean, but how do I guess again, as a customer, you're looking at this going, well, why do I need to buy this if I already have that?
Yep.
I think a lot of the boards are confused, and I think it's hard to clarify that. So I appreciate your matrix perspective. Do you have a comment on that? Like how, since we're messing everybody up as an industry.
Yeah. So stay away from the buzzwords. I mean, zero trust is a concept, and in fact, Nist has done a really good job of highlighting that it is a concept and not a set of controls. And in the financial services industry, we actually work together to make sure that what we consider zero trust, which is really a combination of identity access management, microsegmentation, workload management, control plane management, that we're trying to address this the same way. Because imagine a firm that is starting a trade and a firm that settles a trade, both have zero trust, right? Vendors, but one is IAM and one is microseg. Well, there's a gap there, and threat actors are really going to take advantage of that gap. So understanding what zero trust is, not just to your company, but to your supply chain, your upstream and downstream companies, because you want to be consistent and you want to make sure you cover all those gaps. So I would say I wouldn't discard zero trust as a buzzword, but I wouldn't listen to any vendor that says we do zero trust. I would say it's part of zero trust. It's a component of zero trust. That's a better way of looking at it.
Yeah, I mean, to zero trust, and again, I'm not against it either. No one would be against it, but it's really a process conversation more than a technology conversation. Because as we get back to the whole IAM concept, it's like, well, we can do IAM now, but nobody is capable, I guess, or what level of capabilities do we have to get down to the nitty gritty of really who's supposed to be getting what? How do we allocate and manage that stuff? And it also gets into diminishing returns in terms of your risk acceptance thing. Like you drilling all the way down to all of that stuff, it's really, really challenging. It's just basically the same problem with microsegmentation, drilling all the way down to every single, defining every single conversation, what can and can't happen. It's challenging, and maybe it's so challenging that it's not worth not doing it all, but it's worth understanding you're never going to get.
So I would disband the concept of zero trust as deperimeterization. I would actually think of that you still need the perimeter protections. It's just defense in depth. A good example is at one of the banks I worked at. They had a set of mainframe systems that nobody had the source code to, and they were afraid to do anything. And all the users had global public access because they were afraid to modify that because they didn't know what the software was doing. So one of the things, concepts of zero trust around that was, well, maybe you take functionally the mainframes and put them in a perimeter, a segment, right? And you apply zero trust rules to that segment, right? Or you take a function. So if one of those mainframes are part of the mortgage business, you take the whole full stack for the mortgage business and segment that and make that a perimeter and do zero trust against that entire segment. So you're not deperimeterizing. You're just making the perimeters as fine grained as they possibly can. That makes sense. And that's important to me, that we're not trying to A, boil the ocean, but B, take on a task that just is impossible. It's infeasible, right? Do what's necessary.
Yeah, and it's also, look, to me, a lot of these things work much better at build time. I mean, fundamentally, you can make a decision to, as you're building systems, build them this way, figure out what the protocols look like, those structures look like, and again, it's that shift left. I mean, and I know doesn't fix all the historical stuff we have. I mean, the mainframe stuff, like to your point, like no one, that's black magic. No one knows how to do that anymore. But just old guys like us, right? And we don't do anything technical anymore, so this doesn't work for us. We're just on blogs. But in any case, yeah, I think, but again, if you were doing that stuff from the get go, I think greenfield, a lot of these things do work, and you can build this way. But we're not necessarily even doing that, frankly, right? Because we're in the same mode we're always in. We're rushing to get stuff out there, and we're not really worried about security.
Security, and the agile and lean frameworks. They're not. I wouldn't say they're conflicting, but they're very difficult to integrate. If you're doing 2-week stories, it's very difficult to understand what the threat model is against the entire application and where security needs to be put in. So you need to have someone in the background saying, okay, here's the holistic view. Here's the change in the threat model due to this new story, and work from there. If you don't have someone doing that, then you're going to be caught behind the loop. And we've all seen the studies where the cost to fix a software bug at production time is like 10 times more than if it were at development time. So yeah, big fan of that.
Look, just we're a victim of our own success in this, and like whatever. Like as an older guy doing this, we used to all sort of be generalists. We understood hardware, and we understood software, and we understood networking, whatever. But now that's not the way it is. So every time you're talking to somebody about security, they feel like within their realm of expertise, they are secure, but that doesn't really make for a secure system. And I think that's a challenge for us as an industry, though. I just don't think we have the right people at the table to really talk about that stuff on the whole. It's just we're too segmented.
I agree.
Yeah. All right. So let's just okay. You got something else here?
I was going to say, did you want to open up for questions or?
Yeah, I want to see if there's some questions. I want to kind of get back to email. We're kind of waxing philosophical here about zero trust, but I know we want to get back to just talking about email for a second. Is there anybody on that? Can we open the mics, Ali, or is there anybody on that has any questions? No. Couple more seconds.
All right.
All right, I think we're good. I guess we answered all the questions today, John. So is there anything you want to give us as a takeaway? I think, again, like getting back to, email, where we're heading, where we're going, what we should, I think we've covered a lot of territory, but what would be I want to leave you with this one thought in your head about how to get more secure regarding your email.
Yeah, I'd say with the email, it's a matter of training your users properly or changing the culture of your users. So treat them with respect, right? Treat them as adults. And again, uh, do as I do, not as I say, right? Lead from the front, right? Be able to have whatever you're going to put down on your employees for training or for activities or for processes. Do it yourself and do it visibly, right? Make sure that you're showing by example. That's really important.
Yeah, I love that. And like I said, I just think I'll tell people this all the time from a phishing perspective. You've got to bring your game forward. If your phishing exercises look like, what you call them, spray and pray, then your phishing exercises are not sufficient, right? And maybe you might be feeling good about it because nobody's clicking on the Rwandan Prince email, but that's not really the kind of attack you're going to see. So make sure that you're moving your game forward as a phishing or as a red team exercise, just as the attackers are moving forward. I